for me, I'm very like, I need to know people are listening and engaging and like actually getting something out of it rather than just distributing something out into the like wider world. And, are people into it? I don't know. No one's commenting. Like, how do I know? Right. And so then it became the realization that I could have essentially a podcast, but make it private and have people sign up and utilize that as a lead generating activity.
Welcome back, everyone, to Launch Your Private Podcast. We have a case study episode today after a summer hiatus. I'm coming in solo. Nora is not with us today, but she will be back with our upcoming interviews. I went on maternity leave and so did Derek. And so we've, spent the summer taking care of our newborn, Bowie, and he's very cute. And then Nora has been taking care of her child that is going off to college. So we have very different, family-like situations happening. But I'm excited to be back at Launch Your Private Podcast. And I have Bree Boucher today on the hot seat. This is going to be a fun interview. This is another, long-time Hello Audio user, has many, many private podcasts. But we're going to learn about a specific private podcast today that she ran and how that went for her. So Bree, welcome. Why don't you start with a little intro about yourself and your business model?
Thank you. I'm so excited to be here and really excited to have you back in the online space after having some time off. So really cool to see you back. Okay, so my name's Bree Boucher. I'm an introvert marketing and mindset coach. So I work specifically with introverts to help them market their business, to find collaborations. And most people know me for like bundle events. So a lot of people find me through that space, and I love to help people connect, different types of bundles and collaboration opportunities to help them grow their email list and then launch some amazing offers into the world. So that's kind of like, what I've been doing for the last little while. And yeah, definitely obsessed with podcasting and private podcasting more so. I love how we can kind of see who's actually listening and all of that. Whereas you don't get that from the public space. And that's sort of, why I've been so drawn to this more so than most other communication strategies, I suppose.
Yeah, the introvert likes private podcasting. I'm not surprised.
Surprise, surprise. Who would have thought?
Cool. I know, right? Surprise. So, okay, so let's talk a little bit about that. What private podcasting is new. We talk about this a lot. It's a kind of a new-ish thing on the scene. So when were you first like, this makes sense? I mean, obviously the introvert piece, but can you remember back to when you're like, yeah, private podcasting, and I'm going to totally use this in my business?
Well, I obviously at some point you don't know about it. And then I discovered it through Lizzie Goddard and, explored a lot of different ways that she was utilizing it, predominantly essentially just like, putting her courses into a private podcast feed. So that was like my initial, okay, that's what I'll do. That makes sense. Making it available for people in different ways. I love using, or listening to podcasts as I'm walking and doing the dishes and all that sort of stuff. So for me as a user, love that approach. Being able to multitask is always fun. And so that was my initial kind of thinking of how I was going to sort of step into the space. And then as I realized, like the kind of data that you get out of it, like I said before, you don't see this stuff. You don't see like who's listening. You don't know like how much someone's enjoying it because you can see the super listener score and everything with private podcasts. You don't know that when you're doing a public like podcast. And so I actually ended up stopping my public podcast because that was not where my, excitement came into. Like I wasn't keen to do that anymore because I couldn't see all that data. And for me, I'm very like, I need to know people are listening and engaging and like actually getting something out of it rather than just distributing something out into the like wider world. And are people into it? I don't know. No one's commenting. Like, how do I know? Right. And so then it became the realization that I could have essentially a podcast, but make it private and have people sign up and utilize that as a lead generating activity. And so I've, had a few little kind of dips in the water as to different ways to do that. But the one that actually has worked the best for me is my Bundle Secrets podcast. And so that is one of my main lead generation activities into that space, into that kind of business part of like my niche. And essentially, it's just like episodes explaining what bundles are and like answering a lot of the common questions. And that could work, and it would definitely work as a public podcast. But if I can get leads and if I can kind of, measure what people are listening to, that's going to obviously help me. So that's sort of how I guess I've explored this whole space. And on top of that, I just would love to have like an audio first business. Like that would just make things so much easier for me if I could just get the phone out and like I'm not really fancy. I do have a microphone, but most of the time I'm just, doing a voice note and recording an episode of something, like riffing on something. And so if I can just do that really quickly and publish something, like of course I'm going to do that. Like that's so much easier for me.
I love that. That is definitely one of the reasons, like one of our main things at Hello Audio is like, it could be so much easier to create content, especially for people who like to talk. And
Yeah.
then on the flip side, it's really easy for your audience, right? They can listen when they want and you kind of spoke from both sides. Like I love listening to a podcast while I'm walking. And then this is how I love creating. And so I think you hit on some of the major things for us too, like the idea of having a public podcast. Cool. We could look at downloads and talk about how we have a public podcast to people who care. But the real thing is it working for your business? Is it generating revenue? Is it generating leads? And it's
Yeah.
hard to draw that straight line on a public podcast. You have to be very intentional about, calls to action, all the things. And even still, maybe it was the lead magnet itself and not the private podcast, like that's doing the conversion. So just thinking about that kind of thing, I think help our audience, like hearing the insights from a business owner about those decisions that you're making, pausing or shutting down a public podcast to really focus on those niche lead generating private podcasts is pretty huge. Cool. So let's talk about this 100 Days podcast. I think people are going to really like this. So you've definitely dabbled, you've had podcasts in your summits and you've made them as part of your offers. So let's talk about this specific podcast. If you want to outline what it was, the content and like what it did for your business.
Yeah, absolutely. So 100 days to 100K challenge is what it kind of was born out of. And essentially, I wanted to share like my journey of trying to achieve that goal in like making 100K in 100 days. I was like, okay, so I can share this information in a few different ways. Like I could write blog posts about it, I could write emails about it, I could share it on stories. And eventually I landed on like the realization, of course, I'm going to record a private podcast and then maybe also do some of those other things as a like supplementary thing, like as a different version of what you get in the private podcast. So what that looked like was I think it was the 22nd of January. I decided to start my 100 days. That was kind of like that was the week after I came back from summer holidays for me in Australia. And I was like, yeah, we're going to just go for it. I had all over the summer period, I had in my head like 100 days, 100K. Like it was just something I really wanted to go after as it's like a massive challenge for me. And a little bit of a spoiler here, I didn't make 100K 100 days. However, there was so much more that I learned about myself, about my business, and so much came out of that. So it was essentially documenting like this whole journey and talking to my audience about all of the stuff that's going on for me. So business life, part of it was I wanted to like establish some new habits for myself. I wanted to do things like 100 minutes of like sales activating activities every day and other things that helped me move forward. So every morning I would try and do like a meditation or some sort of like focus moment. And at the end of the day, I would listen to a hypnosis session. And so I did that for like just the hypnosis part for like 8 weeks, I think was the cycle that I had. And just that up leveled and shifted so much in my mindset throughout that whole time. And people listening to this will hear all of that stuff. I didn't hold anything back. I shared and I continue to share. Like I'm talking about this like it's something that I'm not doing anymore. But I actually have 3 seasons of it. I'm in my 3rd season of this show essentially now. my second season, I didn't end up completing. I realized I needed to stop because I went straight from season one into season two, and I kind of burnt myself out around like trying to achieve this goal. And I needed to like have a minute to break between it. So more recently, I'm into my third week right now, I think, of the most recent 100-day cycle. And what I've changed, like it's evolved over time. So the first season, what I was doing was trying to record an episode essentially every day or as like frequently as I could. And it didn't mean that, I maybe got an average of 3 episodes a week out, which was still really good for me. And it like, from a resistance level, it was really simple. As I said before, I just picked up my phone and recorded stuff. But one of the things that I realized was that was probably too much content for me to be creating in this way. But at the same time, I was repurposing it. I was like, using it in different ways. I was communicating this to my email list to share the lesson for that week, or like the thing that I've realized, or like an episode, I would actually send it through Cast Magic and get like a breakdown of what, I actually said. And then I would email my list about that and let them know this is what I talk about in the 100 Days podcast. Firstly, you should be listening, but also this is the sort of stuff that goes on in business. And not everyone talks about it. And that's been like one of the biggest things that I get from people is they really like to hear this behind the scenes stuff. I love behind the scenes content myself. So I know that other people do, but it's really interesting to be able to hear that from other people, like that they want to hear that stuff from me. Like that's kind of cool.
I want to say too, like, and so there's a bunch of questions because you shared a lot.
I
Was
know,
this a
right? So,
free thing?
no, actually, it's paid. It's a paid product because I wanted to
Okay.
be to pay.
Yeah, good. Good for you.
So that has actually changed a fair bit since the first season. I've tried a few different pricing like structures. I started off at $7 and that was like, you get it for life. And then I added in, because it's not just a podcast, it's also like all of the stuff that I was experiencing. Because I'm a NLP and hypnosis practitioner, EFT practitioner. I can share resources that I've created that will help other people to deal with the same issues or like challenges I was coming up with. I included resources like that. I included, someone said to me, hey, I would love to do a challenge like this. So I was like, cool, well, let me just templatize my Notion dashboard and here you go, you can have it kind of thing. And that's kind of like how it's evolved. It's like the podcast, but there's also like the other bits and pieces. And so from a pricing perspective, it needed to change a little bit. And more recently, I'm still doing like a $7 price point, but that's more of like a subscription option. And then I'm like quite literally about to change the price for the lifetime, listen to the episodes and get all of these extra goodies. I haven't actually landed on that price. So I'm not able to share that right now, but it's under $100. It's not like a bunch of money, but it, it certainly, I think it had to be a paid product. If I was not going to share the resources, I think it would work as a free product, but that wasn't really my intention, like what's the intention coming into it? And so it wasn't like a lead generating activity for me. So it needed to be monetized.
Cool. So could you share some kind of results that it had maybe for your business, whether it's super tangible like metrics or even just like some of that other, stuff that we get out of doing things like this?
Yeah. I think like definitely it's more intangible, the results. As I said, some people, have reached out to me and said, thank you for sharing this level of information. Thank you for like just even explaining how like hypnosis works and how like the stuff, sort of stuff that I was doing. But then also, like I currently have just under 100 listeners and about half of them are subscribed. So some people like are really excited about listening to this, but then actually don't do it. And so I've tried like a community connected to it to see if we can kind of get a conversation started. But for me, it's really about a way for me to create a different type of content for my audience. and explain different things outside of what I would normally like share in terms of, like my business and stuff like that. Like I said before, I, really want to repurpose this. And so I've recently started writing essentially like a summary of the podcast in a Substack. And I shared that with my email list, and like embedding the episode as well, like, adding the option to listen to it in there. And I've had like really impressive, like for me, I was really surprised, the amount of views that have come through my email list, but also just through the Stack, like Substack app itself. So that's really interesting. And for me, that tells me there's like that has legs outside of my audience at the moment. And that was one of the things that like I realized that this is a piece of content that sits more in like the middle of the funnel kind of thing. Like it's for people that already are familiar with me, are like warm to me, know me. Those are the types of people that are listening and wanting to like, invest in something like this. It's not really a top of the funnel offer. And so to be honest, that is one of the things that I've realized about like my business, that obviously I understand funnels and I know how they all work, but like also considering where the content lies within the funnel and how my podcast can be top of the funnel, bottom, and like middle of the funnel. And so that was really something interesting that I hadn't really thought about until I created this podcast, and realizing this is how people, connect with you.
That's cool. Like thinking about, yeah, because I think at Hello Audio, we look at the like ways to use private podcasting and we really think it's like it all throughout your business. And so this idea that surface for you, that like where the podcast is and like what's happening strategically and how to think about it at those various stages and like what it's doing, what the purpose is, what the listener's doing at that point, how much do they know about you? How much do they like need to know in order to take the next step? That's all like really valuable marketing work. And what's cool is the idea that you can use a private podcast, an audio version of your content in order to move people through. But you mentioned that adding in that newsletter aspect does help, right? Especially with something like Substack, which has reach out of, your current users. So that's pretty huge too. So I think that's a big takeaway as well.
Yeah. One of the things that, also intentionally or otherwise that I wanted to have like this podcast be was kind of like a way for me to move my customers and my audience from one point of the funnel to another, like one product to another, because it's low ticket, we're going to get people just testing the waters with it. Right. But then I'm talking about like the things I'm launching, the things I'm selling, like every single episode in some form or fashion. Like I'm saying things like I'm planning to send out an email about these sorts of things that are coming up together, or I'm creating like the sales page, or I'm telling people what I'm doing in my actual day and how that's reflecting in, in sales. It's kind of like I see it as another really warm place for people to hang out in terms of like moving them through my funnels and like through my offers suite and everything. It's kind of like adding those touch points, the amount of times people need to hear about a thing before they're ready to purchase it. If I'm talking about it over and over again, I'm hitting a lot of those touch points for them. And I can look at those super listener scores and go, they've heard me talk about this a lot. I can actually reach out to them now and say, hey, I would
Okay.
love for you to be in this offer because, I think you'd be perfect for it. And like, I know they've heard me talk about it.
I love this. And I just for those listening, the super listener score is something that is from Hello Audio. It's like an algorithm that we wrote to keep track of like who's listening, how many feeds of all your feeds, how quick do they listen, the number of downloads. And so people basically get ranked. I don't know if it's ranked. I think I'm trying to use the CRM language, like in active campaign, they do it too, but it's basically this idea of getting a rating per customer, per, audience member, per listener of how hot they are of a lead, I guess, or somebody who likes your stuff, right? Because they're actually listening, they're downloading, they're active, and they likely have several pieces of your content too. That's a cool part about it. If you have multiple feeds, you can see their scores higher. So what I like about talking about this concept of kind of it's a vlog, but it's audio. I guess it's not vlog, it's
Exactly.
not a vlog. There's no audio version of that,
I
right?
know
Like
we
there's
need
no way
to
to
create
say a
something.
log. It doesn't work. Yeah,
Exactly.
something. But this idea that like you're documenting yourself, it's like the Gary V thing, right? Like just document, like that's content. But you're charging for it. That's huge. And you've released multiple seasons so people can go back and they can binge it. There's a lot of really cool parts of this. I think it reminds me of Natalie Boland's episode with her sales podcast. And, hers was, she just saw it as like motivation and she made herself do it every day. So I guess my question to you is, was one of the harder parts like coming up with content? Because that's a lot of people's first reaction is, what am I going to say every day? And even if you don't do it every day, like you mentioned, were you worried about, a full 3+ months of being committed to producing audio content?
I love this question. And I will tell you that I definitely was inspired by Natalie's episode. Like, I heard that and I was like, hang on, this is cool. This is
You
cool.
ready?
I definitely want to be that YouTube girly with the vlogs and like this is what I've been doing this week. But I just haven't done that yet. And that's because like it's hard to video yourself and like alone. It's a lot of investment in terms of remembering to do it. So, being able to do this by audio, so easy. And then to answer your question, I've not had any concerns or like, oh my God, I don't have anything to say today because I have a lot to say. um,
Well,
and
and you are committing
I
and showing
just,
up every day in your business. So you're reacting to the taking that action. If you were just like, I don't know. I don't know if I could vlog what's going on in my life right now. It'd be like a lot of boring newborn stuff. But like when you're like doing stuff, like running a business and being like, for at least 100 minutes every day, I'm going to do sales activities, stuff happens every day, right?
yeah, absolutely. And so now that I'm kind of like, all right, I'm committing to at least one episode a week. And there's obviously tons of things I could talk about. Yesterday's episode that I recorded, like I wrote some notes down and really funnily, it was like 5 things starting with S. And I was like, perfect. That's a great story to start off with. All of these things that I, wanted to talk about. Wanted to talk about Substack. I wanted to talk about a summit workshop that I was doing. I wanted to talk about simplifying my business. Like, so all sorts of various things. But I know that people want to hear random stuff like that from me. Like, but it still is cohesive. And so sometimes it is just me literally picking up my phone and rambling. And sometimes it is a bit more like of a ramble. And other times it's these are the things that I need to cover because I need to it's almost like me expressing them, getting them off my chest. I feel like I'm talking to like my besties, which I guess I am. I just don't get the feedback from them. So it's kind of like what I would share with my coach, what I would share with my friends that are in the business world. And it's whatever's coming up in that moment, to be honest. And you reminded me, I actually tried this a year prior. We'd sold our house. We were moving to our plan was to like just sell up and move to the coast, which I have. I'm at the beach now. But in between, we were like, let's do a little bit of a travel thing. And so I was like, I'm going to do a travel vlog of some description. And I started trying to do that as an audio like thing. It was going to be like 31 days of what's going on. And I started recording that. And like I did have some people subscribe, but then I knew they weren't listening. So I stopped being interested in it. That was something that I guess I was mindful of this time round. There's an aspect of me, as I said earlier in the conversation, like putting content out into the world without knowing anyone's responding to it is really difficult for me to be able to, I guess, continue doing it. And so when I knew people was like purchasing and then listening, then I was able to just continue recording the content. So that I guess definitely helps with the motivation behind it. The ability to actually record the content, I was actually like coming up against some like physical barriers in that I wasn't able to actually record like anything, video, audio, when I was, anything that required me to speak, I wasn't actually able to record longer than like 20 minutes before my voice, like, and my throat would just like really tense up. And so I realized I needed to have vocal coaching. And so, like, that was, one of the big kind of like personal development things that came out of this is I've known I've had struggles like with being able to speak for a long period of time. Like, it really physically exhausts me. And doing this content, in that frequency basically brought it to a head. And I realized if I don't fix this, I won't be able to have a business sustainable because I need to communicate like with my voice. I can definitely write stuff, but I want to communicate with my voice in some way. And so I needed to get this sorted. And so that's what I've been doing for the last kind of few months. I've been getting vocal coaching and improving the way in which I speak. Before this interview, I was doing like vocal warm ups and, all the sorts of stuff that I never really, like, I guess I knew people did it, but I just didn't think I had to.
That's so fascinating. Yeah, I imagine like someone who's about to give an hour-long talk or a singer, right? Like, of course,
Yeah.
singers have to do it, but that's true. Nora and I we tend to record like 3 shows back to back on full days for podcast recording. It's a lot. I could probably do some of that too. I can tell it's like a breathing thing for me. So that's a big
Yes,
part of it,
that's
right? Like the way you breathe and where your breath comes from.
Yeah, that's definitely a big problem for me, but there's so much more deeper. Like, the person that I'm
Mhm.
working with, I chose them because they get the subconscious stuff. And like, my neck muscles would be really tight, but then I could take a break and
Yeah.
for a few hours and I would be fine. But like, my neck muscles would be tight and then like my eyes would be really tight. And so we've identified that is also connected. Like, there's different things that are connected, and it's because we use our eyes a lot whilst we're talking. And so I was exhausted in different places of my body. So
Mhm.
physically and also a little bit emotionally exhausted. And yeah, it's so fascinating. And I really wouldn't have gotten to this place unless if I hadn't have started this podcast, right? And I think that's really
Yeah.
cool. Like,
It's like you're committing and like 100 days of talking, even if it's not in a row, you're basically going up to that standard. You're seeing, I don't know, standard baseline of like, how was I a week ago? Oh, I feel really tired. Like this hurts. Like you're basically putting strains. You're maxing out your capacity by doing it in a row for that long. And so that's really cool.
yeah, definitely.
So, one thing we haven't talked a ton about, you kind of mentioned it a little bit in passing, but I'd love to hear how your audience responded to this podcast, like how people connected with what you were saying and kind of, the impact that it had on their personal and professional lives themselves.
Yeah, one of the things that I mentioned, like, I inspired other people to do their own like challenges, whether it was 100
Mm.
days or otherwise. Just listening to the development, I guess, that I was going through inspired them to want to do that themselves. And I could definitely, if I was considering, is this going to be like a product where I teach people how to do this, or is it just going to be me like sharing my experiences? And so I had a bit of a fork in the road where I needed to decide on that. And in the end, it was just like, let's keep it simple, Bree, and just share, my experience. And if other people are inspired, I'll give them some resources, but it's not the point of the game. And so just having that, and then as I said before, we tried a bit of a community, like we tried a group chat in Instagram and other places because I had people messaging me saying, things like, this is really interesting. And I would love to know more about this book that you recommended or this person's whatever that I was doing. And so it was really just opening up like a conversation, which was wild for me in a different way. Like, I often get people replying to my emails and stuff, and we have like conversations, but up until that point, a lot of what I was doing was very one way, and I wasn't getting a lot of like people talking back to me. Whereas now I definitely do, and I think a big part of that is because of the type of content that I'm now creating as a result of sharing so much more of this sort of stuff. I think it's more like inspirational. And I think that's really cool. Like, I love that I'm inspiring people in different ways in their business. That's probably more the stuff that I've been getting feedback wise.
I love that. And I can tell too, I think this also shares like that the fact that you've had 3 separate seasons of this, you've experimented, you're definitely a true Hello Audio user. Like our people love to experiment and test things out in marketing. And so going through and being like, let's try a Facebook group, let's try a, WhatsApp, whatever. Not that you said either of those things, but like, how can I make this more engaging, or how can I connect people if that seemed like something that the audience would want to do, and to just going with the flow and seeing what comes out of it. And so now you're starting to get more responses from your audience, possibly because you're sharing more personal content and a little more like open versus so structured. I think in the content, social media space, we can get so like methodical about it. Like, I need to post every day. And so then what happens is it ends up just like feeling very much of the same. But when you do something like this, let your guard down, let them behind the scenes, do it for a long time, have an audacious goal, right? You start to be like, oh, like people start to turn their head, right? They start to say, this is interesting. This isn't more of the same. So that's exciting that you found that out and did that through audio, that audio was the right way for you to express yourself, and then for your folks to stay with you that whole time too, because that's a commitment for them from the listener perspective too.
Yeah, absolutely. And for sure, I've had some drop offs. Of course I did, because I stopped the set like season
Totally.
2, but I had like a cohort of people sign up for the podcast recently, and I can see a big spike. Like, they listened to that, first welcome episode, and then there's a few, episodes here and there that they've picked up. And that was one of the things that I wanted to do with like the naming hierarchy of my episode.
Mm.
Was for people to understand what it was going to be about, and they could pick and choose what to listen to. So I think people were doing that, in that they weren't listening. Like, some people for sure have binged and told me that they were going back to the very start and listening all the way through. I think some other people have just picked up episodes here and there, and that's totally okay. And it works because I repeat myself so much. Anyway, like, I'm doing one thing one week and hello, I'm doing it again. Or I'm like, it's something else that's evolved with it. There's continuity enough for people to miss episodes and pick stuff up as well. So yeah, I love it. It's really cool.
There is a little bit of incentive to go back though and listen to the first episode if they want to see the evolution. If they want to see how you ended up where you are now, they want to go back. I don't know. Why would I go back and listen to Amy Porterfield's first episode of her podcast? There's no reason, because it's probably old information, right? Like, potentially. That's obviously a very different setup of a podcast. But that's what I think is interesting about these very personal behind the scene podcasts, is like, it makes you want to listen to the whole thing, because you need, part of the reason to listen is the journey and not just these individual, take this episode, whatever. But I could totally see how, okay, this individual episode, there's definitely something powerful here. I can tell the title, whatever. And I think that's cool when you think about these behind the scenes, get in the head of you, like of the creator type of content.
Yeah. And you know what? It's one of the reasons like that I wanted to create this, was so that there was like a time capsule as well, like a really fun thing for me to be able to go back to as well. Like, when I hit that 100K goal, whenever that's going to be, that 100 days, and I've made the 100K, and like go, yes, because definitely someone that achieves goals and moves really quickly to the next one. And like, I would love for me to be able to like take a moment and listen to that journey. But like you say, for my audience and my people to do that too, and like to get the little wisdom that I don't really know that I'm sharing. Like, at some
Mhm.
point, I would also love to kind of go back and almost audit my journey and pull out stuff
Mhm.
that I know is the reason that certain things have happened. I think that in itself would be really cool to do at
Totally.
some point.
Yeah, that's really cool. All right. So along these lines of looking back, what advice would you have for somebody? We could start with just generally like this type of content. What advice would you have for somebody who's looking to create a challenge like this, or do this behind the scenes content? What do you wish you knew before you started this private podcast specifically?
I think a lot of it is about getting out of your own way and just doing it. And knowing that I'd tried that before, I'd forgotten that I'd tried it when I did this version of the podcast. And it wasn't until I went through my Hello Audio feeds and I went, oh, yeah, that's right. I, I tried this again before. So just be okay with the fact that you will have tried something like this before and it didn't work, it didn't feel right. That's okay. Most people won't have noticed this. Like most people, because it didn't work, no one knows it was in existence. So it's not a failure to anyone but yourself. And so let's just ignore that, like, it happened almost. So try multiple times, try different approaches because the previous version was more like lifestyle. That wasn't the right approach. This is like life and business. That's what got people excited. And in particular, having a reason, like a purpose to listen to it. Like there's a reason for people to listen to me ramble on half an hour every episode because they want to know if I get to that 100K. So thinking about the listener's like reason for wanting to tune in, I think would be really helpful to do.
So good. There's a lot here for sure. Awesome. This has been a great episode. I'm excited. Hopefully, we see more of this type of content. I think Andrea Crowder has something like this now. She has a membership as well. And so I'm like starting to see, it's funny, like we started to see a little more audio courses. And now I think we're starting to see people paying for like ongoing private podcasts. But what's cool is it's funny because it's kind of full circle if you look at it, because that's what public podcasts do, right? That's how they made money before things like Hello Audio existed, where people were putting private podcasts of just all types of content. It was like behind the scenes of the podcast or extended interviews of the show or something like that. And it was, $5 here or there. So, people are creating like real memberships that include just like you talking and sharing behind the scenes what's happening and making it like a time capsule in some level. And so this idea that it doesn't have to be free, I think is key. It doesn't have to be $5. $7 was yours. I think Natalie Boland's was like a one-time price. And I think Andrea's at the time of this recording, it's like 58, something like that a month as well. I think she does about 3 episodes a week. Yeah, I kind of want to say this to people who are listening that this type of content is working and it's kind of new and it tends to be low lift for the creator. And it tends to have really engaged listeners because it's easy for them to binge the content. It's easy for them to stay up to date versus watching a YouTube video, right? Where we have to like find the time to do it. So just kind of connecting some dots here personally as I like see other folks and what they're doing. We'll have to have Andrea back on, of course. But this was amazing, Bree. I'm so glad that you were able to share. I'm so glad that you were able to share behind the scenes of 3 separate seasons of doing this. So you're definitely a pro. And yeah, where can people maybe find out more about you? We'll definitely link to some stuff below the show, but if there's anything you want to share, go ahead.
Yeah, definitely. So I would recommend connecting with me on Instagram. So my handle is at Bree Boucher. And that's, sometimes I'll share extra little snippets on my stories. I don't necessarily post often, but I do like to share on stories there. And that's a really cool way to connect with people. So that would be, the best place to start off. And then you can kind of swirl around and different things from there.
Sounds good. Okay. So we end every show with this question. If there was a private podcast of your life ramblings, what would it be called, Bree?
Well, outside of the 100 Days to 100K podcast, which definitely ramblings, I would probably call something like this my walk and talk, like Bree's walk and talk or something, because I do love a good walk and talk. Like if I'm doing a Zoom call with friends or a coaching call where I don't have to be like at my desk, I will go out and walk and listen and talk to people. So
Nice.
that would be, and it flows, like conversation flows out of you, or at least for me, when you talk, when you're walking, it's so much easier for it just to come out. So that would be my other podcast.
Your vocal coach probably has some reasoning behind that.
Yes, she certainly does.
I can see it's like moving energy, like you're moving energy through your body in some capacity. So maybe you're like, doesn't feel so constrained. I don't know. But yeah, I agree. I love a good walk and talk. I love a good hangout. And yeah, it's awesome if you could monetize it or engage with your audience. while you do it, right?
Exactly. Why not?
Well, thanks for hanging out, Bree. It's been a pleasure. And yeah, we look forward to your next private podcast that you launch.
Amazing. Thank you so much for having me. It's been really cool to chat with you today, Lindsay. Thank you.
Awesome. Take care.
And there you have it, audio heads. Another episode of Launch Your Private Podcast is in the books. I hope you're leaving today feeling even more ready to amplify your voice and connect with your audience in meaningful ways. The adventure continues in our next episode with even more insights, strategies, and inspiration to help you along your own private podcasting journey. Of course, make sure to check out helloaudio.fm to start your own private podcast. And remember, you've got amazing content that needs to be heard. So let's turn the volume up. Until next time.